Hello, everybody, and welcome to Libromancy, a podcast about the magic of books. I'm your host, Josh, and today I'm going to be talking about A Traitor in Skyhold by John Bierce. So let's spy on the magic of books. Everybody, welcome back. This is the third book in the Mage Errant series. And honestly, at this point, I had forgotten that this was the third book. I honestly when I picked this up, I was like, oh, I'm not on the Traitor yet. I got another book and then I'll be on the Traitor. So I did forget for a minute when I started it. I was like, oh no, this is the third. And it's just amazing how fast we've progressed and how fast we are progressing. I don't think that's a bad thing in this book. I just think it's something to remark that we are moving much faster. And I have to say, just first off, I really do think that John Bierce's writing style has improved a little bit, gotten better. There's only one thing I can really specifically point to, and this is not a spoiler unless you haven't read any of the books. And if you haven't read any of the books, I'm not sure you should be starting here, but let's just talk about a little bit of his writing ability change or his growth. I feel like at this one point that I really noticed is that he is much better about using Talia's Dreamfire. Now it does more than just one of four things because, dreams are different and they do different things every time, but they are very different. And I feel like he's really gotten much better about talking about the magical effects and being more descriptive. I've noticed a much better descriptions. We still I can't say we get a lot of info dumpy stuff, but we do get a little bit more of things explained. We get better choices. The pacing of this book was very fast paced. I really was like, wow, we were just turning and turning and turning, keep going to the next page, keep going to the next one. So I like that a lot. I think the atmosphere of this one did not give me, it is another school book where they're still at their school, but this one did not give me as much of a magical academy session or setting as it could have, it is a magical academy setting and they are still learning stuff, but they're not learning, or rather they're not devoting a lot of time to this is your classroom. We get a couple of those classrooms from Hugh, who stays our main point of view character, and we still do start to branch off and see other point of view characters. And we even get a couple, or at least one from Eluston in this one, which is nice. And I really like the world building that he has done in this because it's questions that we would have ourselves, but he answers them in a very here's how it works. Now we're going to get into spoilers, everybody. I'm sorry, there's not a big spoiler time or not a big non-spoiler time for this one. We're just going to get into it and you'll hopefully enjoy it as well. So talking about the kind of info dumping, let's talk about the way he's made his magic system work, where we started off with stone and steel and iron affinities. And now we have a crystal affinity and we have sand affinities and we're learning about plant affinities. And, we know that the more specific they are, the more powerful that specific affinity is, right? Steel beats iron, but steel could only affect iron, whereas iron can kind of affect a lot of things. Or sand, how do you do sand? So they're talking and they're training and he's like, well, how do affinities get determined? Because it seems random, and it is, but he's like, this doesn't make sense. How come I can affect stone, and Arthur can affect stone, and Godric can affect, sand. We all have sand, can mess with sand, but none of us are sand mages. So how is that all working? And Eluston explains, well, the magic works based on your linguistic concepts that correspond to real world things, create affinity. The more, so if you go to a culture or, a different language, you spoke a different language, which they can't, of course, because of the tongue eater, which we learned about. Man, the more we learn about the Athonian Empire, the more I'm just like, wow, yeah, they sucked. They definitely did deserve to die and to be, erased. And hearing that the Havath Empire is kind of like their spiritual successor does not give me great hopes for them. But they did all sorts of training and testing, tried raising kids with fake languages, tried raising kids with languages describing things that didn't exist or couldn't exist, all sorts of things. And they found out that the linguistic concepts correspond to real world things. So if you had somebody who lived in the, snow, they could have 3 or 4 different words for snow, and each of those could be an affinity. But then you could have somebody else who lives in the desert. Maybe they don't ever have snow affinities because nobody knows snow, or they have one snow affinity, or it's probably more like a water affinity, right? But that's kind of how it goes, is you have the more culture kind of focuses on it, or not focuses on it because that makes it bad, but the more your language is developed to describe it, the more specific it can be, corresponds to also how, diverse your concepts can be. So they found that things don't exist. The things that don't exist can't be affinities. And Talia brings up, well, how about dreams? Dreams aren't real. And he's like, yeah, but nobody ever says that dreams aren't happening and that dreams aren't there, right? Nobody denies that dreams exist. They exist. They're just not a physical thing. So that was really fun. So, okay, let's talk about some of this one. This was funny. Talia's Dreamfire magic, now that we mentioned her, the blank, I'm going to spoil their name for a second, even though we're in the spoiler-free section. She erupted into a a burst of caustic sounds, tastes heavier than stones, and colors that rasped across your skin. I was just like, ooh, that's really nice. That's so good. And so I really like that there's also one where, I don't remember exactly, but somebody's head turns into wooden coins. Oh, there, I found it in my notes, of course, after I start talking about it. So let's talk about the plot a little bit. The plot of this book is basically, hey, we know there's a traitor in Skyhold because somehow Indris knew about Hugh's Warlock Pact, and the only people we told about that are the senior council. So you guys are going to have to investigate while I, Lustin, go investigate a bunch of other stuff. Also, you need to try and convince the council to move your training, your final year-end test from our labyrinth to a different labyrinth because of Bakori. We don't want him to, influence you or get out, but we had certain people vote no. So the year goes on, they investigate a little bit. I feel like I remember when I first read this book, they investigated them a lot more, but in reality, it's like one meeting done because they have a double meaning behind it. They're like, oh, I'm meeting with you about training techniques. But my secret meeting is to meet with you about changing the vote. And my secret meeting is to vote with you is to figure out if you're a traitor, right? So they meet with them, and we'll just talk about them a little bit. There's Rutless the Red, who is a saltwater mage. There's Abyla, who is a magma mage. That's very cool. Anders is a silk mage. And I didn't write down their full name, sorry. And then Terry is a very, very powerful stone mage. And so they are trying to investigate them. They're not really learning anything. And this was the part that was kind of, we're talking spoilers here. So the whole plan for them was to actually never get that changed, right? They already kind of knew who the traitor was. They do expose Anders as just a generic traitor who, because he's got very high quality silks and that costs a lot more than he's making as a, counselor and stuff. It turns out Abyla is the mage, and I thought Rutless was the mage this time around because I forget these things sometimes exactly who the mage one is. I remembered Rutless being very important to the story and being like, oh, he's not just a salt and water mage, he's a he's not a salt water mage, he's a salt mage and a water mage, which means he can do things with densities and concentration with the salt water to make it super cold. So he's the one who kind of mostly stops Abyla until Bakori shows up because he broke out of the labyrinth at the same time. Meanwhile, it's all been a trick so that Kandarian can clean house, get all the traitors out of her organization, and also so that Bakori can be dealt with for sure. But Bakori, I know we're just jumping all over the place. That's basically the end. Bakori dies and everybody's happy, and now they're going to get on a new thing because the lost city of Ithos is probably returning. Nobody knows exactly where it is, and this is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But Bakori has that crazy powerful features where he comes from a different world that was basically going aether explosion, and then he goes through the labyrinth and he wants to find somewhere else where he can live. He's chosen our world, which is Anastas, but he can't survive there yet because the mana density is not high enough. But he has the ability that he can basically kill his imps and just suck their energy out. So that's kind of his automatic regeneration revival thing. But he also has the ability that depending on how much you use an affinity next to him or a spell next to him, that spell form will break down and stop working in his presence. So you can do 3 levitations basically kind of before it wears out, or you can do 2 of this or 2 of that. Kind of depends on a little bit of your skill, how much you can force, but they just become worse around him. And so I love the end when Ilian Kaindas, Sabe's grandmother, comes in and she's like, hey, I'm a cloud and I'm a boss. And, oh, Bakori, you're over here? How could you do this? Oh, excuse me, I am a weather mage. I work at extreme distances. You're toast. And she has her storm cloud literally chew him and chew him and chew him until he finally dies and he's used up all of his imps. That was just such a sweet scene. And of course, shadowed by the fact that Hugh had been blocking it by accident with his special book, doing the scrying prevention that it can do because it can function like a labyrinth a little bit. And so she didn't know if it was time yet. Aside from that, it was very funny, very good. I love that scene. Talia's always like, oh man, I want to be like your grandma, Sabe. She is so powerful and so straightforward and to the point. Ilian Kaindas is just super funny. We get the council is cleaned of traitors. No more Abyla, no more Rutless, because he ran away and tried to save himself versus saving the kids, which that was another funny thing. At the end, they're like, hey, why didn't you just tell us or help us out with this stuff? And he's like, okay, first off, let me explain some things. This is a loose thing. He's like, the plan was never for you guys to fight your way through a Bakori-infested school, get up, fight the council members, save the day, The plan was you'd go down, you'd have somebody shadowing you, you'd get into the labyrinth, You'd get out of the labyrinth, they'd take you to a protective spot, you'd be safe, everything would be done and happy, right? Not what happened. So it's just really funny. And another thing, I really liked the ball scene where they go to the ball, and that felt like just nice, that little bit of normalness. And Talia is all super dressed to the nines, but she's got like she's like, you don't match your weapon to the dress. You match your dress to the weapon. And she's got knives, and she's got her necklace full of bones that just explode, and her date's like getting more nervous by the second. He's like, well, what? You're carrying that much weaponry and you're that dangerous? Like, it was pretty funny. And it's because she's just jealous of Hugh. But unfortunately, our Hugh and Ava relationship, they break up because Ava's like, I just thought what happened in Indris and Theris Tal was just like a one-time thing. We got swept up in it, but now you're doing this. And it's like, you guys can't help yourselves. This is who you guys are. I'm not going to be able to be with you. That was very sad, but it kind of expected. Hopefully, we'll see something going on between Talia and Hugh in the future. I can't spoil whether we do or not because those are future books. I don't want to tell you right now. I know what happens, just so you know. Like, I've read up. I'm caught up, except for the final book. Saving that for you guys. So let's talk a little bit. I liked the classes that we get. We don't get very many classes, but we do get the cryptography class created by Lorna of the Deeps, who just basically is like, here's a class. If you do your homework, or here's a ward, you have to figure out how to get in the ward and break the ward, or get past the ward and find your stuff, and then get your homework and then bring it to the next and do it right. But she's never like actually talking with them. So that was a really interesting thing. And then there was the custom spellmaking class taught by a sound mage, and I don't remember his name. Emerson Dees, I think. He is scary. That was so funny. The sound mages, you would not think they're that bad, but they are. Basically, as a sound mage, you can create something's resonant frequency and just cause it to explode. Now, this is very dangerous, and it's so funny because he's always like, oh, I'm just going to turn off all the sound in this area except for me talking, and I'm going to do this. And then when he's in the fight, he's just like walking through straight, and imps are exploding all around him. It's bomb. It was just so good. We learned about the cold mines. Excuse me, what are those? We don't know, right? And I love that we learned that there's a special vault inside the council chamber that can only be opened twice a year, and it basically contains very dangerous things. And I love that Alustin reads it off to us, and he's like, oh yeah, there's the last known egg of an Eastern queen, which we heard about in the second book. Basically, it hatches, it replicates, and basically the replicators, and it just takes over and swarms everything. And Ithonian plague generator, a sword that creates inextinguishable wildfires, a sphere that corrupts affinities, and a sentient pair of leather boots with an odd habit of assassinating rulers in ridiculous ways. Just so funny. And Talia's like, well, it shouldn't be hard to destroy some leather boots. And Alucin's like, you'd think so, wouldn't you? You'd think so. I'll give you a chance. You can, take shake a stick at it and see if you can get it to be destroyed, but I doubt it. So it was just super funny. And then at the very end, we learn a lot. We're seeing a lot of like a redacted note between two people, and we're seeing what's going on. And I feel like this was a good book. It's really stepping us up to the next book. The Lost City of Ithos is the next book, so I'm prepared for that. We learn about the Exile Splinter. Basically, we don't know exactly, but I'll spoil a little bit for you because it's not really that big of a deal. But they've exiled the city of Ithos, the main city, out of existence, and now it's coming back, right? And this is something that's interesting, that I wanted to talk to you guys about. The reason he wanted to get the book of the grain harvests and stuff is because, and this is a real thing, in 100 years or 200 years or X number of years, people don't know where things are or what things are. So if you said, I ate eggs for breakfast, and somebody, or you wrote that down in your journal, then somebody 100, 200 years from now could come up and say, eggs, okay, what kind of eggs? I don't know. Is it chicken eggs? They might not know what chickens are even though. So you have to say, oh, they ate chicken eggs, right? It's not something you'd want to do for everything, but having these things spelled out exactly. You wouldn't say what a horse is. Everybody knows what a horse is. Well, what if somebody didn't know what a horse is or what eggs you ate? How would you explain that? And it's actually happened where there's a city lost to history because nobody knows where it was, because nobody ever recorded oh yeah, it's exactly this far away from here. People know that it's a general distance away from certain other cities and things. Oh, I went to this place today and then came back, or but nobody knows exactly where it was in that area because it's been lost to time because nobody wrote about it. So this was a really convenient thing or cool thing that they exiled Ithos and nobody knows where it is anymore because it's been so lost to time into history. Sure, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, whenever it happened, everybody probably knew, oh yeah, that's where it used to be. Well, except for the fact that it also kind of wipes your mind from remembering it a little bit. So there's a little bit more of that to go with it. But now with certain books and that the Exile Splinter weakening, you can remember things and see things about it. So all in all, just a really great book, everybody. I really enjoyed it. This one moved super fast. It's really setting us up for the next one. A lot of fun things. So that's going to wrap up my discussion of A Traitor in Skyhold. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to David Hillowitz for the intro and outro music. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, please send them to libromancypod@gmail.com. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. And remember to spy on the magic of books.